Okay, I think I will go and get started here. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's session, the first of 2022, Discovery in a Disappearing World with TransPerfect Legal Solutions. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Monique Seaver, and I'm the Public Relations and Marketing Director for ACEDS Vancouver chapter. You should all be set to mute for the presentation, but please do use the chat or Q&A box to comment or ask questions. We will save the questions for the end of the session, and this session is being recorded, so you will be able to find it on our ACEDS website after the event for ACEDS members. Today, we're fortunate enough to have Dan Myers, who is the President of Consulting and Information Governance for TransPerfect, who will be our moderator today. I'm going to turn the show over to Dan to introduce the panel and to talk a little bit about today's session. Over to you, Dan.
Great, thanks Monique, really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined today. And of course to ACEDS Canada for helping to organize and sponsor this. As Monique mentioned, my name is Daniel Myers. I'm the President of the Consulting and Information Governance Division of TransPerfect Legal Solutions. I am based out of Toronto. TransPerfect is, for those that aren't familiar, a global e-discovery and language services and technology provider. Before joining TransPerfect, I was a client for many years. I was a litigation partner in the New York office of a law firm called Bracewell. I ran the firm's e-discovery practice group. And so I brought that consulting expertise and practice over to TransPerfect about 6 years ago. I'm joined by two colleagues from our forensics department in TransPerfect. I'll let them introduce themselves. Devin, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself first?
Thanks, Dan. Hi, everybody. My name is Devin Campbell, and I'm the manager of our Philadelphia Forensics Lab. I've been in the field for about 7 years now, and before joining TransPerfect about 3 years ago, I was a digital forensic examiner for two different district attorneys' offices, so the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office and the Wechat County District Attorney's Office. In those positions, I worked with various types of mobile devices, computers, cloud sources, and in my time in both those positions, I had the opportunity to testify and be qualified as an expert several times. I also have taught a few different courses at the graduate, undergraduate level at my alma mater, DeSales University, and as I said, I've been at TransPerfect now for about 3 years with the Forensic and Consulting Division.
Great, thanks, Devin. Daniel? Daniel, you're on mute.
There you go. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Callejas. I'm a senior forensic examiner here at TransPerfect. I've recently joined the company to help expand the forensics practice in Canada. I'm based out of Toronto. Although I've started my career working as a business intelligence consultant, and I pivoted to digital forensics and e-discovery later after. And I come with over 5 years of experience working in the field for big forensic firms, and most recently for EY.
Great, thanks both. So jumping in a little bit, one of the high level takeaways from this is truly that the challenge of defensibly acquiring data from some of the more modern devices, systems, IT ecosystems is really one of the most challenging parts of modern e-discovery. The corporate IT ecosystem gets more and more diverse, more complex, larger every single day. It literally feels like every day we're learning about a new client with a new, business platform that they're using that we haven't seen or heard of before. And many of these newer systems, they lack the integrated acquisition capabilities and features. And for many of them, traditional forensics tools just don't either recognize the file types or don't effectively result in a defensive acquisition of data for e-discovery or frankly other purposes, which is why this is such a challenging area. When I was on the client side, one of the things I was so impressed by the TransPerfect forensics team was the size of the team being, over 40 people. I think it's actually 50 people now across like a dozen forensic labs. But more importantly, the information sharing that very clearly went on between team members. Now being at TransPerfect, I know that the team is heavy on Slack. And before that, it was other programs to coordinate and collaborate. But the truth of the matter is that if the technician you're happening to work with on a project doesn't know how to execute a collection from a particular environment, there's a large team available who has almost certainly seen that environment before and perfected methodologies to defensively collect data. We're fortunate today to be joined by two such people, Daniel and Devin. And so I am going to step out of the way now so that they can talk about these various categories of platforms that are listed on this slide. And I'll kick it over to Daniel first to talk about mobile device forensics.
Thanks, Dan. So first we'll be talking about mobile forensics. As you know, this is now a very important piece when it comes to digital forensics and e-discovery investigations. So today we'll be focusing on two largest platforms that dominate the mobile space: iPhone, iOS, and Android. TLS, as we refer to TransPerfect Legal Solutions, has developed standard operating procedures to streamline collections into what has become a very complex space. Mobile phones are becoming very challenging to acquire day by day, as Daniel mentioned, from having multiple major operating system releases per year to having application updates on a weekly and sometimes on a daily basis. This adds complexity to our job, and a big component is research and development from the team, which we have to do on a daily basis, testing, so that we can make sure that evidence is defensible. Starting off with mobile forensics iPhone, we have found that iPhone is a much friendlier option to collect from. We see this in the business space. People use iPhone a lot, and we found this environment to be a lot friendlier with different options to collect. We have traditional collection options such as in-lab or on-site collections that we can do, but we also have 3 different options for remote collections. We're going to dig deeper further on one that TLS has developed called a Mobile Forensic Kit collection that we'll explain later. We have found also that iPhone is a lot more friendlier when it comes to support. It has more third-party applications that can help debug any collections, and it also integrates very, very well with its iTunes software, so that we can easily identify whenever there's a connection issue or that we need additional support. iTunes and Apple are there. It's also important to note that with an iPhone, we can actually perform a full collection. And we'll talk about the difference with this when we move to Android. On messaging, which is one of the topics that we want to discuss today, and especially on disappearing world, when it comes to messaging, specifically on iMessage, since we're talking about iOS, which is native to, iMessage, which is native to iOS, message retention is very, very important here. The user can choose to retain their messages for 30 days, a year, or for even forever. So this essentially determines the amount of data that we're going to be able to collect when getting an iPhone. Also, when trying to recover messages or deleted messages or conversations that we would typically find in an iMessage library, we have found that some artifacts are left behind that we can actually recover. We have also found that the body of those messages sometimes is not present. So this brings us, our creative minds, into looking for solutions to possibly get those messages from different sources. One of those is the iTunes or iCloud backups. As you know, you can do backups of iPhones either on the cloud or on your laptops or desktops. So keep in mind that some backups might contain relevant information that might be available in the iPhones. So for example, retention period could be of 30 days within the iPhone, but we could have messages that go way back in time if there might be stored in the backups. So keep in mind that not only collecting the phone, there might be other sources that could contain relevant data.
Daniel, I'm going to jump in for a second. We have a question from the audience. Can you recommend tools that collect data from phones? We have used iExplorer, know others who have used iMazing, and I've heard that Dr. Phone is also good. We really need forensic collections as we're only going after text messages.
My advice would be yes. So one of the tools that we leverage is Magnet Axiom, and then Celebrite Physical Analyzer or Celebrite for PC. Oxygen Forensics is also a good one. I would say out of the toolbox that I like to leverage from, I like to use these softwares. And it also adds some other capabilities into collecting other different artifacts that might be on cloud as well.
Thanks, Daniel.
On talking about Android, we have found that security on Androids is a bit more complicated. They focused a lot on privacy around their systems, and they even have securities like a one-time permissions security at an application level that can make the collections very challenging. So they can be collected in lab, on site, or even with the mobile remote kit that we're going to explain in a few slides. But as opposed to the iPhone, full forensic images are very challenging to acquire. It requires sometimes the phones to be rooted or additional steps that might be a bit more complex that the custodian might not be comfortable with. And we never want to risk the data. So, but we do have other options. We can collect targeted collections by specific artifacts or applications. That has its pros and cons. Like for data management, we can focus exactly on what we need. But on the other hand, artifacts that we would find relevant that could uncover additional information would require a little bit more work. Now, to talk up a little bit more about what TLS has developed, this is a solution called TLS Mobile Forensic Kit, which is essentially aids in acquiring mobile devices during these times where most of us on business are working from home. So the Mobile Forensic Kit is a solution that was created to forensically acquire mobile devices remotely. It can be shipped across the country, and it can be used to acquire devices directly from custodians or even IT points of contact in charge of the devices that are in custody. For us, we do not have to be present. For us, I mean forensic experts do not have to be present on site. We only have to send the kit over to someone who is with the phone, and then we can execute remotely a collection. So the custodian or IT point of contact that has custody of a device is walked through a very simple steps over our remote meeting to connect the device to our mobile forensic laptop. And then us as examiners would connect to the kit and walk them through a few very simple steps. And through a remote session, we would perform the collection. So some advantages of these are that the collections are still secure. They are defensible. The custodian is always in possession of his device, his or her device, and the travel costs and expenses might be significantly low in comparison to doing on-site collections. And then after this is done, our kit is shipped to the lab, and then we perform the additional steps needed for reporting and moving the data downstream. Once the collection has been finalized, we begin on the reporting phase of the collection. As most of you know, we handle a variety of formats in order to get data out of these softwares and get them to a review platform, such as Relativity. So our TLS team has developed scripts that help the software help us get the data that we need, specifically in this case for messaging, in a very standard load file that can be later uploaded to a review platform such as Relativity. Once in Relativity, for example, we have scripts that help us display the data and organize it in a way that the reviewers can easily see, for example, a message per control number, so that it's a little bit more coding friendly. And I know this is a challenge from my e-discovery experience that a lot of reviewers are looking for. So here you would see an example of the different softwares that I've mentioned as a recommendation for forensically sound collections. So Celebrite, Axiom, Oxygen Forensics. And then on the right-hand side, it's a short screenshot of how the messages would look like in Relativity. And if you see, you have the date and time, and then you have the messages.
Before moving on to the next section and moving away from the phones themselves, just wanted to catch up on a couple of chat comments and questions. One from the audience is, there are some countries where even if you can get the employee's phone or electronic devices, you can't due to privacy laws or others, such as GDPR in Europe and in China and other countries like that. I know this is an entire webinar session on its own, and the short answer is yeah, navigating data privacy laws on a global basis in the context of, foreign, whether those be US or Canadian or UK litigations and investigations, does create a challenge. There are a number of workflows that can be used to mitigate the challenge, including, utilizing local resources or regional, processing and hosting centers. Most definitely is the topic for another webinar, which is a great idea that we should circle back on. But you're right, it's absolutely a challenge that needs to be considered. And there was another question about expert witness testimony regarding collection process and results. And the short answer is yeah, frankly, all the time, Devin, Daniel, and many other members of our team are probably across the team testifying on a weekly basis, either establishing authenticity and admissibility of records that we were part of the collection process for, or at times challenging the work done by the opposing side. So certainly something that is front and center for us if you have any additional questions on that. And with those answered, Daniel, I'm going to come back to you for ephemeral messaging platforms, because this is certainly one that is sort of an area that is in conflict with preservation obligations, needless to say. And so if you can talk about strategies and pitfalls for addressing that, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. And yeah, as Dan mentioned, the next topic is ephemeral messaging. And we're going to be focusing on messaging, the most popular messaging applications, or something typical that we would find, and the different challenges around applications, specifically on 3 of them, when collecting. So the next slide, please. So I will reference a pyramid, as you can see, that we've put together as a visual representation to explain the complexities around each application. So we have 4 different layers. The 5th one is a multi-source. We won't be touching on that one. And these are very specific, I guess, layers that a phone and an application can touch on either 4 or multiple of them. And it depends on the platform, and it also depends on the application. At the top, we have the good luck portion, where we have applications that are very, very restrictive. And sometimes the only way of getting data collected out of these is through a screenshot. In some cases, and it depends on, again, on the application, we do have the option of forensically creating screenshots forensically for these applications. Second, we have the restricted applications, and these would be the ones that we can actually collect, but it depends on the environment that they are on. So, for example, Wechat we're gonna touch on this later, but Wechat is one of the ones that fall under this. And then third, we have cloud and API applications. that Devin will be talking about. And these are applications that can be extracted without the need of the phone sometimes, and also, but through proper authentication on the cloud environment and on APIs. And the originating source of these is multiple. So we can have data from a laptop, we can have data generated from phones, tablets, whatnot. And at the bottom, we have mobile, which what we have been discussing, which offers a wealth of information. And usually we would recommend getting data from the originating source. And we know that on a phone, there's a lot of data that could be captured that might not exist when we collect data on cloud or API. And the first one that we'll be talking about is WhatsApp, which is one of the most commonly used forms of communication nowadays. WhatsApp is available on iOS and Android, and it also has a desktop version that can be used on Mac and Windows, and also on the web. From a degree of difficulty, WhatsApp is fairly simple to acquire. On iOS devices, if we have the correct credentials, data can easily be extracted. And then from using the web, we can also use what's called the QR code to link devices and our forensic software to pull data from. And we also have the option of doing pulling WhatsApp data from a cloud backup. So some people have their WhatsApp synced to either iCloud or Google Drive, and we can collect data from there as well. Talking about Android, WhatsApp data can be collected, but it has to be from the cloud. Nowadays, deletion, like deleting a message, is a feature that almost every application comes with. In short, messages, a user can choose to delete a message, a conversation, a thread, a group, and it's now being replaced with a placeholder saying what the action that was taken. If a user deletes it from their device, but not from a chat, that, like, for example, a group conversation, keep in mind that if another custodian is in scope and you're able to collect that data, that chat might still exist in the other person's device. So it's always important to consider the different scenarios, especially now when the devices are synced, and custodians could have multiple devices where data could be stored in. Second, we're going to talk about Telegram, which is also a very popular application for messaging. This application can also be used on nearly any platform. It works differently than WhatsApp in terms of data retention, and you can have different ways of communicating with people. You can have regular conversations. You can have group conversations, and you can also have secret chats. Digging into secret chats, and this is why in the pyramid that we have, this falls under the restricted and good luck portion. Secret chats cannot be collected. They are either stored on the phone or on the servers. So that makes the data collection very complex. It's also important to note that when collecting Telegram, time is of the essence. So people can set their accounts to be deleted in a certain amount of time. For example, if it's inactive for a month and you collect the phone 2 months later, the account might be wiped. And the same happens with messages. A user can choose a message to be self-destructive, and you will no longer be able to see it, even if you have the phone. And lastly, Wechat, which we would consider this being also a good luck and restricted application. Wechat is very complex, and as far as we've had the ability to test, we've only been able to get data from iPhone. Different from WhatsApp and Telegram, there is no option to collect Wechat remotely. And on Android devices, it might be possible to collect it only if the phone is rooted. So Wechat is very limited on the documentation that it has. So for testing purposes and development to see if we can collect data in a very forensic manner, very little has been able. We haven't been able to do much because of the complexities around it. Even setting up an account is very difficult. So please keep that in mind.
Thanks, Daniel, for that. Super informative. One quick question from the audience on WhatsApp. Is there an export feature in WhatsApp? And are there limitations in simply using that?
If we're talking about forensically acquiring this data, on our end as forensic examiners, we like to rely on either the phone or a cloud extraction through a forensic software. We want to make sure that data is not tampered with, and this ensures that we are able to maintain the standards of quality across the board.
So if WhatsApp data needs to be compiled for sort of informal purposes, perhaps using the export feature will work, but where it's being collected with an eye to be evidence in a litigation or government proceeding, using forensic tools like you've discussed just preserves the authenticity and admissibility of that evidence?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for all of that, and thanks everyone for your questions. I want to shift now to Devin to talk about cloud and API collections.
Thanks, Dan. So in this section here, in the next few sections, we're going to be talking about a few different sources that we often collect from. And these sources can often be found on a mobile device or a computer, but these sources, their data is not actually stored locally on those devices. The data is typically stored in the cloud or on a server that is maintained by the company. So we are going to talk about those sources and how we're able to collect data from those sources. So as you can see here in our screenshot, we highlight quite a few very popular social media or cloud-based applications that could be located on a mobile device or on a computer. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, those are often found on mobile devices. And sometimes we are able to collect messages from these sources through the mobile device collections, mainly iPhone collections. However, if you're specifically looking for messages from a certain third-party application or cloud-based storage repository, we're going to be trying to access that cloud-based storage or third-party application directly through the cloud to maintain the best type of practices with collecting that source, as well as being able to collect all of the data that is necessary for your litigation needs and or reviewing needs. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, those are often seen on mobile devices. Other cloud storage applications that we see on mobile devices could be Google Drive, we could see Dropbox. Any number of applications can be used on a mobile device. However, that mobile device does not store all that data. That mobile device is just a window into the cloud-based storage from those specific applications. So we can move into the next slide here, where we're going to talk about how we access these cloud platforms. So many cloud platforms that we're going to be collecting from, we're going to be requiring a contact or a call set up with the user of that account. And when we're interacting with that account user, we're going to be asking for the username and password to gain access to that account. A lot of times these accounts, these cloud-based accounts, have some type of security measures in place to, prohibit outside sources from accessing the data on these platforms. And we often run into that with our forensic tools. So we typically will need what's called a two-factor authentication code or some type of two-factor authentication that has been set up on the account. We'll need to work with the owner of that account to gain access to that account through two-factor authentication. When we're collecting from certain cloud platforms, we're always, at the beginning, before we start our collection, we're going to be talking with the legal team and the end client and asking what their needs are for review and production. So sometimes the data that we're able to collect from the cloud is going to be the data that you need, but it comes in a specific type of format. So we'll often run into JSON type of format, we'll run into HTML, sometimes text or CSV. There are different types of formats that will come from these collections, and based on your needs, we'll need to know ahead of time that, okay, we need to review messages from this specific application, and you're going to need that in some type of production format to review at the end, and we'll know which steps we can take or which type of collection we're going to be working with at the beginning to get that end result. Geographic considerations are important when we are collecting from these accounts because, as I previously stated, two-factor authentication is usually needed. So we're going to be, if we have custodians that are mainly based on the West Coast, we're going to be assigning that collection to somebody who's on the West Coast who is available the same general amount of time in the day to either set up a phone call or a quick email with the custodian to be able to talk with them and work through that two-factor authentication if needed. So this is one of our very popular tool in the forensic space, and a tool that we use quite often in our forensic consulting division. Oxygen Forensics has a cloud extractor tool that supports several different types of cloud backups or cloud collections through API. So we're going to be logging in to the account through our forensic tool, and that two-factor authentication can be triggered here when we're performing that logging in. So as you can see on the screen here, we have several options for cloud backups or cloud collections. TikTok has been very popular lately. We've seen a lot of requests come in for TikTok, whether it's public posts, direct messages. We have seen several requests come in for that application most recently. Telegram, as Daniel mentioned earlier, is an application that we often see on mobile devices. However, that application is encrypted on the phone, and we need to access it through this cloud collection tool to be able to collect those messages that are available in the public channels and the group chat channels. As Daniel previously stated, the secret chats are not available through this collection, and that is one of those restricted areas where we may need to employ other types of recording processes or screenshots to be able to get those messages. The second screenshot here is focusing on the WhatsApp application. So as Daniel previously stated in the mobile device and the ephemeral messaging section, WhatsApp is oftentimes an application we run into on both Android and iPhone devices. Android devices are one of those devices where the messages are not accessible through the phone collection. So if you have a custodian who has an Android device and you need to collect the WhatsApp messages from that custodian, we would be utilizing one of these cloud collection options for WhatsApp. Most commonly is the WhatsApp QR code, and this is where the two-factor authentication as well as geographic considerations come into play. As with WhatsApp QR code, we'll have to set up a WebEx where we would share our screen with the custodian, and they would utilize their device and the QR code to authenticate the account, and then we'd be able to begin our collection. One important note about WhatsApp collections as well is during the collection, the phone has to stay connected to internet and Wi-Fi. So that is another consideration or item that we bring up during a collection, because if somebody has a very large account, but they're going to be, traveling later that day and they're going to turn off their device or anything like that, that would be a consideration we need to let the client know about, because it could affect our ability to collect that account in a timely manner.
And Devin, we have a question about Snapchat. Speaking of disappearing messages, if someone is using that for nefarious reasons, can they be found afterwards?
So that's a great question. We do have requests for Snapchat collections often. If a message is sent in the application and it is not saved by one of either the sender or the receiver of that message, it's not going to be available for collection. So that is a type of ephemeral messaging that is very, restricted. As the messages are sent, they're read, and then they disappear unless the message is saved by one of the individuals in the conversation. If there is a message saved within the conversation chat, we are able to connect to that application remotely through username, password, and two-factor authentication, and we're able to collect those saved messages. But the messages that are not saved and are just sent and read and closed out of, we're not able to collect those.
Thanks, Deb.
All right, so next we're going to talk about collaboration platforms. These are applications that are used quite frequently in the business setting, but I've also seen them used for personal use as well. So some of the main players here, Slack, Zendesk, those types of applications we can see on mobile devices, or we see them on computers. However, those applications, even though they're utilized on those devices, the data is not typically stored on those devices, and we would need to access the data through the cloud or through an API to collect. So the benefits of using these platforms, they obviously have a lot of benefits for collaboration and access. They are utilized in the business workplace where many people are on one platform, and you can send messages, you can share documents, and you can access those messages and those documents from several areas. So it's not uncommon that we see a user utilize Slack on their computer for work as well as their phone. And those messages are available at the tip of their fingertips any time of day. They provide certain, project management capabilities and search functionalities that are really useful and help, get to everybody's, end goal, work outside of the, conventional workplace. So we're seeing these options available in a lot of different platforms, and we're seeing them come into play when regarding discovery purposes. So for Slack, we're going to talk about a few of the options available when specifically talking about Slack. So if you don't personally use Slack, you've probably seen one of their commercials. I know I saw a commercial over the weekend while watching football, and they play that little sound on the TV, and it makes you look around. If you're somebody who uses Slack, you know that sound. So using Slack has become, everyday for integrated and everyday use for a lot of people. And the company that you work for or the company that your client has, they're going to have different types of accounts that they use or access based on, their needs. So they could use just the free option, they could use the standard option, the plus, or the enterprise plans. So those are all different options when talking about Slack. Depending on the type of plan that your company is using or your end client is using will dictate what type of data you're able to access in the export or discovery options. So if you're on a free or standard plan, actually all four of the plans have the standard export option. So that standard export option is available to all owners and admins of a Slack environment, and you're able to get public channel content from that export. The corporate export is a little more data. It's going to be available to Workspace owners under, those higher tier plan. So you're going to be able to export public channel content as well as direct messages and group messages. And you're going to also be able to access private channel content as well, and the links that may be sent throughout any of those areas. Third-party archive is a type of collection that would be utilized through a third party. So sometimes companies utilize either Slack, use Smarsh or Global Relay to archive their Slack environment, and you would have to go directly through that third party company to be able to access your data. So we have worked with several companies where we utilize their Smarsh platform to collect their Slack data. And then we also have API-based collections. So the Slack platform, if you have the highest enterprise level, the API-based functionality can be available to certain clients. But we also have options to collect Slack through the API-based options with some of our forensic tools. So we could be accessing a user account with their username, password, and two-factor authentication if needed. These API-based collections aren't usually our first option if it's a large-scale collection. If we need to collect a large amount of users, we would try to use one of the other options first. But for the API-based collections, individual user accounts, such as one or two custodians, we can collect those with the API-based tools and provide you with the data from one of our forensic tools. And then this is just a visual to show what we just discussed, the Slack export options for the free, standard, plus, and enterprise plans. And as you can see, as you go throughout the different types of applications available for your exports, your standard is going to create that lower amount of data with public data. And then as you go through the system or through the chart here, you can see there are additional options based on your plan. Enterprise platforms. These applications are available on both your laptop and your mobile device. So we see oftentimes these applications can be used on both those devices and can come into play with certain types of litigation. We'll talk about Microsoft 365 first. So this platform is probably very familiar to some of you. Either you've used it personally or one of your clients have used it and have asked about discovery options related to this platform. So in the Microsoft 365 platform, you have access to your traditional Office products as well as email through Exchange. We have Skype for business. There's OneDrive access, Yammer, SharePoint, and more recently Teams. So all of those Microsoft products are available through the Microsoft 365 platform. And in turn, depending on the type of account that your company utilizes, there are also options for collection directly from this platform. In Microsoft 365, the Security and Compliance Center is where you would be going to access any type of litigation hold, mailbox preservation, any type of collection or keyword and condition searching. So in this compliance platform, you're able to add litigation holds to users within your company. Your mailbox preservation can be done directly from this compliance center as well. Collections for SharePoint can be done directly from the compliance center, and specific keyword searching and date ranges can be applied at the time of collection if needed. These options are available to an IT representative who has appropriate permissions at the company to access this Security and Compliance Center. This can also be provided to our team if collections if we're asked to perform these collections for a company, we ask for them to set us up with an account in the Security and Compliance Center with specific permissions, and then we're able to provide all of these options and work with the legal team on what they need for the collections. And then the last section we're going to talk about is Google Workspace. So it was previously called G Suite. They did a little bit of rebranding, and now it's called Google Workspace. This is a collaboration platform where you have access to various different areas that would be needed during the workday. So you have access to Drive, you have access to email, you have access to a chat application called Google Hangouts, and all of these areas can be accessed, through a mobile device, through a computer, or on the web. And in this area, you have several different users that are able to access the same area. And these Drive documents and the email, they're not traditionally stored on the laptop as we've seen in the past. All this data is stored in the cloud on Google servers, and we would have to access those through the cloud to collect them. And that brings us to our last point here, talking about Google Vault. Google Vault is an option for Google Workspace users, and within that platform, we have the ability to apply legal holds, set retention policies, and also export custodial data. So within that Google Vault platform, a designated IT representative who has appropriate permissions can perform all those actions, or if needed, a third party such as TransPerfect to perform the collections could go ahead and help with those legal holds, set retention policies, or export custodial data.
Great, thanks, Devin.
That brings us to the end.
Yeah, super comprehensive, really appreciate that. So, I guess it should be clear to everyone by now that there's a lot going on here, right? A lot of different categories of data sources. Devin and Daniel touched on some of the pitfalls and strategies and ways to overcome the pitfalls with respect to particular types, but obviously there's more out there, right? This is maybe it's not the tip of the iceberg, and it's probably more than just the tip, but there's a lot left that fall under those various categories. To Devin and Daniel, so if I'm hearing this all correctly, it sounds like the Office 365 suite and G Suite have integrated functionality that reflects an awareness of this thing called e-discovery and the need to apply legal holds to export data in a way that doesn't manipulate the metadata involved, so forth and so on. Is first and foremost, is that a fair statement? That it's really, of everything we covered, it's really just those two that are sort of consciously aware of and by design for e-discovery?
Yes, they both have those e-discovery capabilities.
Yeah, and have you seen over time some of the other platforms that we've talked about and are gaining in popularity and prominence? In particular, I'm thinking about Slack. Have there been developments over time that make the process easier for folks in your shoes doing data acquisitions for purposes of downstream litigations, investigations, et cetera? Or does it appear like on that topic that the platforms are stagnant?
I think there definitely has been a trend towards, making the e-discovery and export functions more available in the platforms. I think at the core, education at the forefront of what type of plan you're getting and what type of capabilities are within those plans are still somewhat not as commonly talked about. But I think the platforms themselves have the capabilities there. I think the education is where they sometimes lack.
Yep. We have one final question. Does it depend on licensing related to Microsoft, or has this changed? I thought only those with the E5 license have the e-discovery export capabilities. And I think, I can start to answer that, and Daniel or Devin chime in and add more as necessary. But I think the short answer is that the Office 365 search and export ability come with the E3 license, as opposed to the E5 license. The E5 license does unlock additional e-discovery features and tools. In fact, you can do a full-fledged, I believe, processing and review of data within an E5 environment, obviously limited to Office 365 data, but just searching and exporting, even with a E3 license, is sufficient, although I think not with an E1 license. Devin, Daniel, that sound correct?
Yes, that sounds along the lines of what we work with on a daily basis.
Yeah. So I guess I'll close this with one final remark. As we've been discussing, there are far better features and sort of e-discovery aware capabilities in Office 365 and G Suite vis-a-vis a lot of the other platforms and data sources that we've talked about today. That said, proceed with some level of caution when utilizing those platforms. Both security and compliance and the G Suite platform have limitations that one should be aware of before using them in the context of a e-discovery project. For example, the use of search terms is limited. They're not OCR tools, so dead scan PDFs that might have search hits will be missed by those platforms. So we typically recommend not running search terms, but rather just exporting entire mailboxes. And also making sure that there's clarity and validation or just around the standard operating procedure for things like implementing litigation holds. Just by way of anecdote, we have a really good client right now that has for years been using Office 365 security and compliance to implement their legal holds, and they recently realized that the person who had responsibility for doing so wasn't doing it the right way for years and years and years. And they've got lots of active litigation, potential spoliation issues. We've spent a ton of time and effort to sort of reconstitute the litigation holds and implement them the way they're supposed to be implemented, which is not as obvious and clear to the user as it should be using security and compliance. So just be aware of that. It's great to have those integrated tools. It obviates the need to bring in people like Daniel and Devin and use internal resources for quote unquote self-collection, which is fine as long as people know what they're doing, but be cautious of it. At TransPerfect, we make our team available even for quick complimentary calls just to talk about the process and the procedure, make sure that the results are going to be validated before they move downstream. But obviously, you don't want to discover an error in the process 6 months into discovery, right? You got to catch it sooner or avoid it at the outset. And do think of resources like Daniel and Devin as people who not only can execute these things, but also help talk about best practices and processes to make sure that if you're going to be self-empowered by the technology, that you're still using it the right way. And with that final note of caution, I want to once again thank everyone for joining today. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Devin, for sharing your expertise. Thank you, Monique, for helping to organize this. And of course, thank you for everyone who attended. Hope you learned something. Hope you have some good takeaways. And if you have any additional questions for us, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks so much, Dan. I really appreciate it. Devin and Daniel, thank you very much. Great presentation. Next month's presentation will be posted shortly, so look out for that, everybody, from ACEDS. And that takes us to the end of the presentation. So if you do have any more questions or need to get a hold of Dan or any of the other presenters, please do let us know and we'll pass your information on to them. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.